Hi, I am Kimmy with On William Street, and today we are going to do a little bit of a series over the next few weeks, and we're going to show you how to quilt. And this is going to really be a video series for the absolute beginner. So if you have never quilted before but want to learn how, this is the video for you. So over the next 3 weeks, we're going to walk you through the entire process of making a quilt. So if you are, like I said, an absolute beginner, you're going to want to start with today's video. After today's video, next week, we're going to show you a very easy way and give you some very basic steps on how to free motion quilt and finish your quilt. And then in week 3, we are going to show you how to bind your quilt. So if you stick with us, by the end of the series, you will have a complete finished quilt. But in true On William Street style, we can't start out with just some squares. That's not exciting enough. So we actually are going to use our Floppy quilt pattern. I'm going to show you the diagram here. So this is a quilt pattern that you can get from our subscriber library. And it might look a little more complex, but it totally is completely easy and super beginner friendly. If you are not new to quilting, you can easily whip this quilt out in a weekend. But if you are new, stick with us and we're going to walk you through each and every step that you're going to need to make to complete this quilt. And I promise you can do it. So you can get the pattern in our subscriber library on our website. So what you're going to want to do first is go ahead and grab that and then come back and we will show you the different supplies that you will need to start your quilt. Okay, so the tools that I'm going to show you today are really kind of what we consider the absolute basics. I'm not going to worry about anything too terribly fancy, and this quilt doesn't take anything completely fancy. But some of the things that we would not attempt quilting without are a rotary cutter. This is going to make cutting all your fabric out so much more accurate and so much more simple. Along with that, you're also going to need a ruler. If you only have one, we really like this 6x24. It's a very versatile ruler. You can also get bigger ones, you can get smaller ones. Start with something that's kind of a nice mid-range, and then you can always, of course, buy more and add to, which I'm sure you will. We also need a cutting mat, and any of these tools you can get at any of your local craft stores. If you have the big box ones, your local quilt shop, these are all easily able to be found quite easily. The other thing that we are going to use a little bit of that is not necessary is our 1x12" ruler. We use this guy all the time, and there's a couple little spots we're going to trim up. Actually, I think just one little spot we're going to trim up that we're going to use this. So like I said, it's not necessary, but this one's a very useful tool. Other than that, of course, you need your sewing machine and you need some thread for today's project. Because of the fabrics that we're using, we're just going to use just a basic white thread for our piecing. You could also match it to the background and do a light gray, and that would work great too, but you don't need to worry about swapping out for the blocks. You can just use the same color thread to piece all of it. So now let's go ahead and look at our fabric. Okay, so for the pattern, as far as fabric goes, you're going to have the gray around the outside, the light gray, you're going to have the dark gray on the inside, and then you're going to have your 12 different floppy discs. And the pattern does call for a duplicate, so you're going to get 2 out of each one. This also works for a scrappy. If you, like I said, you've got a fabric stash that you're working from, you can do each one separate. You'll just need about 1/4 yard of each of the 12 different prints as opposed to the 1/2 yard of 6. So on your instructions, you're going to see your fabric requirements here, and this is what you're going to want to take to the fabric store with you. So you're going to have 1/2 yard of each of your 6 different prints for your discs, and this is a great one to use like some nice bright bold colors. So pick like an orange or a pink or blue, green. Orange, you can kind of even almost think Crayola box, so it doesn't really get too complicated trying to pick those out. The next one you're going to need is a 3/4 yard of dark gray, and we are going to confuse you just a little bit because we swapped our grays for this quilt. We love to use up scraps. We were using kind of what we had left over, so we do have the light gray going on our floppy discs and the dark gray in the background, but as far as the pattern goes, just know that this first one, 3/4 yard dark gray, does match the pattern and it goes inside your floppy discs. And then the second one is your 2 1/4 yards of light gray, and that's going to be all of your background pieces and your borders. Then you're also going to need binding, and you're going to need your backing, which we will talk more about in following weeks. But if you're buying everything at once, go ahead and grab those now so that you have them and you're ready to go. Okay, so now you have your fabric and you're ready to go. This is one of those things that you're going to hear a lot of different opinions on, and it's whether to wash or not to wash. I don't wash my fabrics first. I really like the more the crispness that they have if they don't wash. And I don't mind the shrinking afterwards to give you that little bit of a quilty crinkle. Totally fine with that. So I don't actually worry about washing. If you have some prints that you're worried about maybe the color fading or the color bleeding, shout color catchers in your wash with your quilt the first couple times work wonders, and we've never really had an issue. So you're going to have your fabric, and we've already cut out a lot of pieces, I will admit that now, but we have a few pieces. I'm going to kind of show you how it works. And your fabric, in the instructions, you're going to see, so you might see sometimes referred to as WOF, which is the width of the fabric. And that is really just cutting the selvage to selvage. So you're going to cut a strip, whatever length that is, selvage to selvage. And that's going to be considered your width of fabric. Okay, so to cut the fabric, we're going to kind of walk through this a little bit. And we really like to work from the biggest measurement to the smallest. So this one is the dark gray. And the first measurement on there, the fattest measurement on there, is a 4-inch strip. So like I said, we've cut it from the width of the fabric, so selvage to selvage. Just keep it folded along the same line that it came folded off the bolt. Usually works just fine. And you're going to cut the strip. You might have to square it up first. The end that was cut at the store most likely isn't going to be square or straight. So I'll show you how to do that here in just a minute on our next piece of fabric. So this one we've cut the 4 inches. And the first thing you're going to want to do is we like to cut the selvage off first. The selvage does not shrink at the same rate as the rest of your fabric and can leave some weird puckers. So line it up so that it's nice and straight across the top on one of your lines, and that will give you a nice square cut. And then you can just cut that selvage off, and you're not going to use those. Go ahead and toss them. After that, normally for the pattern, you're going to cut 12 pieces 4.5 inches wide. I only need one more to finish up the block that we're working on to show you. So I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do though. We are not going to waste the rest of this strip, I promise. So you're just going to take it, and you can leave it in half if you want, and cut 2 at a time, or if you're more comfortable opening it up and cutting 1 at a time, go ahead and do it that way. And you're going to find your 4.5 inch line on your ruler and line it up right along the edge. Then you're also going to want to take one of your other lines to line up across the top, and just making sure that you have both of them lined up is going to keep your piece square and as accurate as possible. Hold it down with a nice little bit of pressure and cut your piece. So repeat till you have 12 of those for all of your floppy disks. Then you're going to want to go ahead and just set those aside. After we have that, the next thing that we need is a 1.5 inch strip. So because, like I said, we don't want to waste this, we want to use all of our fabric, I'm actually going to go ahead and just cut my 1.5 inch strip from... Oh, I have one more I need to cut. Sorry, with this one, it's a little bit backwards, but we do have one 1.5 by 4 inch strip. It's listed in the pattern next to the 1.5, but we can cut that out really fast since this is already 4 inches. And we're just going to do the same thing. Line it up on the 1.5. As you can see, my ruler is well used and loved. And cut my 1 1/4. So again, if you have any left over the 4 inch after you cut your 12 4.5 inch pieces, you can go ahead and cut all of your 1.5 by 4 inch pieces, as many as you can get out of that. All right, now that we have that done, we're going to trim it down, and we're just going to go ahead and trim a piece off the entire strip. And this is going to be the full 1.5. This is going to be the 1.5, the full length of your strip. Whatever happens to be left. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut one of them, cut as many pieces as we can from that, and then cut another one off of the big cut of fabric that we bought. So let me show you. We've got lined up on 1.5 here. Make sure that we're nice and square on the edge, and just cut the full length. We're going to move this out of the way. Can cut more from that later if we need it. So then I have this nice little 1.5 inch strip, and the next size that I need out of this is 7.5 inches. I like to use the ruler to hold it down in place. If you have the ruler there, it's not going to shift and move on you. So use that to your advantage to hold it in place. I don't need to worry about this length at all, so I'm only really focusing on the 1/2 inch here. But then using one of these lines to make sure that it is nice and straight. Hold it down, it's not going to shift and move on me, and cut that piece. So then go through and you would cut until you have 12 of those 7.5-inch strips. Now with this, the next strip that I need is 1 inch. So the same thing, we're going to take our strip, whatever is left over at this point. You're going to find you'll have less and less left over each time. And we're going to trim that down to a 1-inch strip. This 1/2 inch probably isn't going to be useful for anything, so we're just going to get rid of that. And then we're going to cut more 7.5-inch strips out of that 1-inch strip. So you can see we're being very specific, kind of very strategic in how we work through the cut list. And like I said, that's just going to keep things nice and organized, and it's going to utilize the most fabric and be the least confusing. So we have our 7.5, hold it down in place and cut, and then you could go through and cut as many 7.5-inch strips out of that as you want. So that's going to kind of show you how you're going to use those strips and cut them down. Now let's pull out what we need for the actual discs. So the one that we have here is this nice purple flower, and you can see when we unfold it, the sides obviously aren't straight. This one's fairly straight, I'm not going to worry about that, but I want to make sure that this side is straight before, it's fine, before I actually start cutting anything. So I like to make sure, you're just going to want to make sure that the sides are lined up and even. So refold your selvages if you need to, iron it nice and flat if it's super off, but you want to make sure that everything's laying nice and flat and you've got things lined up here and you have your fold over here. And then you're going to just cut as little as possible to make sure you straighten that out. You can see I have a very tiny bit showing above the ruler there, so I'm going to scooch down just a bit to make sure that everything is actually cut and straight. Use your ruler and line it up along either the fold edge or this edge, and that's going to make sure that this now gives you a nice even edge to cut the rest of your pieces from. As you get going, if you're cutting a lot, you may need to actually come in and re-cut that straight edge a couple of times throughout the piece, just because we're human, we're not perfect. So just re-straighten that out as needed as you go. After we have that cut, for the floppy discs, we need to cut a strip that is 9.5 by 14.5 inch. And if you are using 6 different prints, you're going to want to cut 2 of these out of this piece. So this ruler actually is not going to be quite big enough. So I'm going to use my cutting mat. It's fine for this. So if you have a ruler that doesn't allow you to make the measurements, you have your cutting mat that's going to have all of your measurements on it. So what we're going to do is, you can see that there is a 9.5 on the cutting mat. However, I'm actually not going to use the 9.5 because it's a lot easier to line this up on one of my actual lines and then just subtract it from the other end. So I'm going to go ahead and line it right up on this 10 and make sure that that whole edge just lines right up along the line on my cutting mat. Then take your ruler and you're going to count back your 9.5 inches. So we're going to go down to 1/2 inch, because then I can take my ruler and my ruler can then easily line up on those 2 1/2-inch marks and make sure that you measure twice and cut once. Sometimes I'll even leave it here and count back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I'm good. Then you're going to want to make sure that you put your pressure in the center of the ruler, and don't move it when you do that, to make the cut. That way it's not going to shift on you as you make that cut. So now set this aside. From here, this needs to become a 14.5-inch rectangle. The nice thing about this quilt is it has nice big pieces, so the blocks go together really quick and easy. This is kind of the main section of the block, so it's going to help all the pieces are going to come together and sew onto it. All right, so now I've got it lined up on the 20, and I'm also lining it up along the top just to make sure that I'm keeping things square. So if I've got it lined up along the 20, then I know that I need to cut it off on the 5.5 inch mark to make sure that I have that piece 14.5. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that piece down. And I'm just hanging on to these extra pieces as I cut it down to use for the other littler pieces. So this is the main section of our floppy disk, so we can set that aside. Then I'm going to take this piece that I have, and it needs to be 4 by 5.5, and I do need 2 of those. So let's see, I should be able to get them out of there. Yes, and because this is 5.5, I can use my ruler markings, so I don't need to worry about lining it up on the board. Now with your rotary cutter, something to keep in mind, these blades do wear out. So as you're using it and as you're going through, it's really no different than scissors. It's going to dull, so don't forget to change those out periodically. It'll be much nicer for you as you're quilting if that is nice and sharp. All right, then after that, we're going to cut it into 2 4-inch pieces. So line it up on my 4-inch line. Make sure that it's lined up along the bottom. Cut 1, and like I said, we need 2 per floppy disk of this size. So we're going to do the 1 and then cut 1 more. And then we are just about done with what we need for the floppy disk. This piece I don't think is going to be quite big enough. It's only 1.5 inches. So we're going to pull this over here, and we need one piece that is 2.5 inches by 4 inches. So let's see and make sure that that's going to be, yes, that's 4 inches. So we're going to cut the 2.5 inches off the leftovers. And then flip it and cut it down to the 4 inches. And we just need 1 of these per disc. So if you're doing 2 per color, like following the instructions, you'll see that you need 2 of those per color, and that will get you your 2 discs. So those are the 4 pieces that we need for the floppy disk, the 3 different sizes. And we have the pieces out of the dark gray that are going to construct and make up the rest of the floppy disk. And then the last thing that you'll need to cut is the light gray that's going to go around, and it's going to be the border. So we've already cut that. And we just did it the same way we did the gray. These are all going to be fairly skinny strips. Most of them are going to be 2.5-inch strips. Then we're going to have a few 1.5-inch squares. And then you're also going to see some 2.25-inch strips. And those are going to be the borders on the outside. I don't have those here, but everything's pretty much about the same size when you get to the cutting of the light gray that goes around the outside of the blocks. And like I said, you'll just cut them down the same way that we did the dark gray that's going with the floppy disk. Okay, so one thing that you want to pay attention to when you're cutting your fabric is some fabrics have a direction to them. As you can see here on our purple flowers, it doesn't really matter how you lay that out. So that one doesn't matter as much. Some of them, however, are going to have a definite direction. If we had these blue shapes going the other direction, it would be very, very obvious. So when you're cutting it out, if you do have a print that has an obvious direction that it goes, just make sure that they're all going the same way. So with this one, whatever direction the width is, the rest of them are going to all be taller than they are wide when you sew them all together. So just make sure, like I said, that those prints all go in the same way. The best way to do that is to kind of lay it out next to each other and be like, okay, this is the way that it needs to go. All right, this is the way that I need to cut it, and that will help you make sure that everything's cut in the same direction. Okay, so now that we have all of our pieces, I'm going to kind of go through the layout of how these are going to get sewn together. So you're going to have here on the instructions, you can see that the printed piece is going to go next to the dark gray piece that matches the same width. Then your rectangle piece is going to go the other side, and how you know this is going to be the right side is it matches. The other one is just a little bit longer, so that will help you make sure that everything is laid out where it's supposed to go. After that, we're going to put the skinny piece along the bottom, and it doesn't look like it fits now, but that's just because we haven't sewn our seam in there. These pieces are going to get smaller. The fat piece is going to go across the top, and then we're going to sew our 2 side pieces on. After this, we are going to take this little tiny square, and he's actually going to go on the corner. So when we get to that, I'll show you what to do with that and how to put that on there. But this is the basic general layout of how it's going to go. So what you're going to want to do is sew this one to this one and this one to this one. Then we're going to iron them, and always, always iron. And I will tell you, I hardly iron anything. I would really hate for my iron to get worn out ironing shirts and not be ready to use when I need to iron quilts. So we just avoid ironing shirts, but I always, always, always iron my quilts. It's going to make everything lay a lot flatter, and your seams are going to be a lot nicer. So don't skimp on the ironing stage. It's totally worth it. After we've ironed those, then we'll sew this one on and the top one on, and again, stop and iron, and then finally the 2 sides. So that is what we're going to go ahead and go over to the sewing machine, and we will get those all sewn together. Okay, so before we start sewing, I do want to show you one thing. So on this machine, we have our walking foot, and you can see it's kind of this great big foot. And what this does is it actually has teeth on it, as well as the feed dogs underneath. It basically has feed dogs in the foot, and so it's going to move your fabric together. Sometimes, if you've sewn very much, you know that sometimes the top fabric moves at a different rate than the bottom fabric and can be a little bit of a pain. The walking foot helps to prevent that. If you have a walking foot for your machine already, we definitely recommend using it to quilt. If you do not have a walking foot, however, it's not necessary. Don't go out and buy one. I'm going to show you how to pin, and we're just going to pin and line things up that way to keep everything together. But we do have a walking foot, so we're going to go ahead and use it. But like I said, if you don't have one, it's totally fine to just use your regular sewing foot for this. You don't need anything fancy at all to quilt. Okay, so now I have the first 2 pieces, and like I said, as you get more experienced, you might feel more comfortable not pinning them, but to get started, we're going to go ahead and just put a couple pins in there. And you don't really need a lot on these smaller pieces, but if you just put one inside from the start a little bit and one towards the end, and just make sure that everything's nice and flat and everything's nice and lined up. Now when you quilt, you are going to use a 1/4 inch seam. So you're going to want to make sure that you have that identified on your machine. This one is going to actually be this line right inside underneath. It kind of hits inside the feed dog holes here, and that's our 1/4 inch. If you have a hard time seeing your 1/4 inch, you can always take a piece of painter's tape or masking tape or washi tape if you want something cute. And you can put that down, and that will give you something to easily see and line your fabric right up against. Having a nice accurate seam is really going to be key in making sure that all of your pieces come together correctly at the end. So if you have a nice line that you can see, you don't need to worry about the tape, but if it helps you out, that's definitely something that a lot of people will use and put on their machine. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put it down just right on the end. Sometimes, make sure that I'm trying to get my threads off to the side, so I can kind of hold them in place and they don't bunch up underneath. And then just go slow. If you are using a walking foot, turn your machine on, that helps. If you are using a walking foot, the thing to remember is that it is a walking foot, not a running foot. They are not meant to go super fast. And then also, we don't recommend sewing over pins. So you're just gonna take it nice and slow and just keep your fabric lined up right on your 1/4 inch mark. I like to bunch seams together in groups as much as possible between ironing and cutting and sewing, just to simplify the process as much as possible. So we're going to take that one off, and then on the other side we're going to add the 4 by 4.5 inch piece of gray, and the same thing. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in here just to make sure that things stay lined up exactly where they should while I'm sewing. And if you notice, I am putting the pin down a little bit from the start, and that's just so that I can get it underneath my foot while the pin is still in place. Take a few stitches, and then you can take that pin out and not have to worry about your fabric moving on you. Okay, and then this is where we want to go ahead and press it before we keep sewing. And I'm going to give you a couple little tips and talk about pressing here as well. So when you're pressing, the thing you want to remember is that you are pressing and not ironing. So what is nice is if you set that seam first, it's going to help keep things smoother. Then open it up, and you can even almost kind of finger set it down a little bit, and then you're going to want to kind of put your iron right on top and not so much pushing it out. Pushing out is going to distort your fabric. And then push the other one out. The rule is, you'll hear people say a lot of times that you're going to press to the dark side. I like to press to the side that's going to be the most convenient for lining up and for reducing bulk later on. So on this one, I'm actually going to go ahead and just press them both out. We're going to have a couple other seams in here, but for the most part, because this is a simpler block, pressing them both out is going to be just fine for this quilt. Okay, so now you can see this piece that didn't look like it was going to fit at all matches up perfectly. And the nice thing about this quilt is, at least in the blocks, there's no seams that you're trying to line up or no seams that you're trying to match. So you don't have to worry about that. We are going to have some as we start to put the blocks together. So don't worry, you will get practice doing that, but there's not going to be a lot. And for these first few steps of putting the blocks together, you can just focus on making sure that your seam is accurate and everything is nice and straight. So I'm going to throw an extra one in the middle there just to keep it from shifting on me, and sew the next seam. All right, and as you get going on this, if you need to hit pause or rewind, obviously don't feel bad doing so. My YouTube self is super, super patient, and I will just sit there for hours while you work on the step that you are on, and I won't even get upset with you. So feel free to pause as needed. Now I'm going to go ahead and put that top piece on, and the top piece is the little bit wider piece. Remember that. And then after that, we will need to take it back to the iron to sew it together. As you get going, you'll realize we are almost kind of making a modified log cabin block. Log cabins kind of work in the center and then build on themselves, and that's really what we're doing here with this floppy disc. So after you finish this one, if you see a log cabin pattern that you like, you know that you'll totally be able to do it. So now that we're done, we're going to go ahead and take these over to the iron and press them just like we did the last ones. And I'm just going to go ahead and press these up so that on the back, all those seams are still going out. That way we're not trying to fold this over, and it's going to keep it really nice and flat in the end. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and add this side really quick. And the same thing, we're just going to put a few pins in here, making sure that it's lined up at the top and the bottom. And you may have noticed I'm not actually back stitching on these, and the reason is you're going to be sewing over all these seams as you put the block together, and a lot of times with quilting you're trimming and adjusting and shifting, and your back stitches are going to be cut off anyway, so you don't actually need to worry about back stitching each and every seam. You can just sew straight through. All right, now we need to go back over to the cutting table to show you one quick little step that we're going to do with the other side before we sew it on. Okay, so for this step, we're going to do what is called a stitch and flip technique to get that little corner side on. And what this is going to do is this is going to prevent having to cut triangles and sew biased edges, which can stretch and be really finicky to mess with. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this little 1.5 by 1.5 inch square, and you're going to draw a line. I'm just using a regular pencil. If you can't see the pencil, you can use school chalk, You can use a marking pen. There's a lot of different marking pens you can get at stores, but I'm just going to use a pencil. Our goal here is really to keep things as easy as possible to get started and to make this quilt, and a pencil is going to be totally fine in doing that. Then what you're going to do is you're going to place it on the top left corner of this big square. So make sure that it's the 4.5 inches is this direction, this is the 4 inches, and put it on the top left corner. Then we're going to stick one pin in there. We just need one pin, and we're going to go back to the sewing machine, and we're going to actually stitch directly on that line. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this in, and like I said, we're just going to sew directly on that line. Get going a little bit and lose the pin, and you're just going to go from corner to corner. Okay, and pull it off, and then we're going to trim that up and then be ready to add it to our next piece. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how to cut that excess off. Okay, so now we have this seam, and we're going to take, this is where we bring in our little ruler, but like I said, the big one will totally work. It's just going to be a little bit more bulky. But you're going to line up your 1/4 inch mark on whatever ruler you have, and you're going to line that up on the line that you stitched, and then you're just going to trim off the extra, and that's going to still give you your 1/4 inch seam. But like I said, we're eliminating having to deal with triangles. Now what we're going to do is when we iron that, we're just going to fold that out, stick it under the iron, and then we have our block that's ready to go on the side of the rest of the top of our floppy disk that we've been putting together. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and pin this to this piece, making sure that that little triangle is on the outside and not touching the gray inside. So let's add our couple of pins. And then sew our 1/4 inch seam. And after an iron, that whole top half is done, and we're ready to add it to the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and put the bottom on this, and it's just the same thing. We're just building upon that center block. So I'm going to put a couple extra pins on here just to make sure, like I said, that they stay lined up along the entirety of the block. Stick one more in here, and sew our 1/4 inch seam. Right, so now this is done. I'm going to go ahead and iron it, and then we are going to deal with the little circle that goes on the inside. Okay, so the next step in the pattern is you're going to take this template that we have right here, and you're going to cut out gray circles. And this is going to be the same color as you did the rest of the pieces inside the floppy disk. So the pattern is going to call this a dark gray. And then what you're going to do is you're going to applique it onto the center of the block. So we want to take just a little bit of time to talk a little bit about applique. In our quilt patterns, we use what's called raw edge applique. You can see that the finished edge is here and showing, we don't worry about folding it under and sewing it on. You can definitely do it that way, but that's a video for another day. We're going to keep things nice and simple for our beginner quilt here, and we're just going to use the raw edge applique. So what I wanted to show you here is some different options that you can use for your raw edge applique. The first is you really can just put it on top of there and use a straight stitch and sew it around. This is one of those instances though where you do want to use a little bit of a back stitch. Also, you'll notice that the thread really shows up here, and that's because we've used white thread on these dark shapes specifically so you can see what it looks like. Normally, we would match. So when we sew them onto our actual quilt, that's the thread I'm going to use, and it's going to blend a lot more. The next stitch, and the one that we use most of the time, is what's called a blanket stitch. So this is one that you may or may not have on your machine, but if you have a blanket stitch, this is kind of the look that it gives you, and it gives a nice finish around the outside, and then has these little stitches that tuck in to hold the piece in place. Another option you can use is a zigzag. So I have two different zigzags here. This is just a zigzag, and you can play with how far apart you like your zigzag, but most machines, even if they don't have a blanket stitch, are going to have a zigzag, so this is a good option. The last one is also a zigzag, but it's considered a satin stitch, and it's when you put your zigzag really, really close together, and you get it so it's almost this nice fat bolded line around the outside. This one, if you do choose to use this, we definitely recommend that you put interfacing on the back of your block around where that circle is going to go. Otherwise, it pulls and puckers a lot more, and it's going to lay flatter if you decide that this is the stitch that you like. So we are going to use the blanket stitch on our blocks here to show you how to finish that out, but I wanted to make sure that you saw some of the different options you can do for your applique. Okay, so to applique this on, the next step, there's three things I'm going to need. We're going to need our big block, our circle, and we are going to use just a washable Elmer's glue stick, and I'll show you what we're going to use that for here in just a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my block and I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to do a finger press down the middle, and that's just put your finger on, rub it down, and what you're going to see that's going to do is that's going to give us a nice line down the center of our block. I'm then going to take my circle, and I'm going to do the same thing. When you press this, make sure you're careful not to stretch it. Anytime you have not a straight edge, you can have a biased edge there, it's going to stretch and pull on you, so make sure that you're careful there. And then I have my center line on my circle. Then I'm going to take the glue stick, and I'm going to put just a little bit, we don't need a lot, just a little bit around the circle, and what that's going to do is that's going to help hold it into place while I'm appliquing it, but it's going to wash right out. Then you can kind of place it down a little bit from the top there. I am not a perfectionist, so I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to do what looks good, but if you line up the two center lines, you know that it's going to be centered here, down, like I said, about 2 inches. I think it should be about 2 inches, an inch and a half from the top there. And then just try to get all of them roughly in the same place, and it doesn't matter where they are, they'll look fine. Okay, so now we are ready to applique this on, and a couple things to remember is first, just go slow. Missy actually does all of our applique, and I am here today to show you that you can do it. I do very, very little applique, so I am to show you that it is easy. This is a very easy shape, and you can do it. The second thing is we are going to go ahead and put a little bit of a back stitch, and remember that we did change out our thread so that it matches this, so your little mistakes aren't going to really show up. So don't stress over the little mistakes. And what you're going to want is the needle is going to come down right in the middle to start, and then it's going to jump over. So you just want to make sure that when you're lining it up with the blanket stitch, we're doing the blanket stitch, that your needle's hitting along the edge of the applique, and that's where we're going to want to try to keep it lined up throughout. So we're going to take a couple stitches, then we're going to back stitch and go forward. Like I said, just go slow. If you have a piece that comes up, you can grab a pin and kind of push it back under where it's supposed to. If you have a machine that allows you to change the speed, you can always set that down to a half speed to make sure that you don't accidentally get going too fast. And I am sewing along in real time here, so you can just sew right along with me as you're putting your block together. And we don't really change our stitch length or settings for this when it's a nice big piece like this. You can just stitch with your normal, I mean, what we call it, a 2.5 roughly, on your stitch length. So I'm going to just lift up my foot and smooth things out a little bit. You can see I'm starting to get a little bit of a pucker. You might not be able to see, but I am getting a little bit of a pucker, so I'm just going to smooth things out with a pin and keep going. When I do pick up my foot and move it, I'm just taking very little turns just to make sure that everything's still laying nice and flat. We're just about done. So we do recommend going through and finishing out all the blocks to this stage and then doing all the applique at once. That way you're not switching back and forth between threads. There's no need to do that. Back up, do a couple of back stitches. And we are done. Oh, also one last thing is when we're doing applique, if you have a point that allows you to put your needle in the down position when it stops, definitely use that. I didn't mention that at the beginning. But there you can see our circle is all appliqued on and ready to go. So now all we have left to do here is to put the borders on the outside and the blocks are finished. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and add the borders, and you're going to use the shorter ones first, and they're going to go ahead and go on the two sides. So we're going to add the two side borders, and then we'll go ahead and put the top and the bottom border on. So I'm just going to grab some pins and stick a few pins in here. Stick one in the middle. and sew that on. We're going to change back to our regular stitch though. We don't want to be doing that with a blanket stitch. Okay. All right, now we will go ahead and add the other side. All right, those borders are on, so we'll go ahead and take it to the iron and then add the other two. All right, so now we just have two seams left, so we're going to go ahead and add that last strip on the top and the bottom. Flip it around and do the very last one. And just like that, you have completed your very first quilt block. So I'm going to go ahead and iron this up and we'll go from there. Okay, and now that you have your first quilt block done, go ahead and just repeat it 11 more times and you will be ready to go and put this quilt together. When you're laying this out, you don't have to have anything fancy. You can just go ahead and do it on the floor. But I will tell you one thing that I like to do after I've laid all my blocks out and decided on the color placement is I will take a picture with my phone and look at it with my phone. And if there's something that's like two colors that are really close to each other, right next to each other, or something's just not quite right, it seems to stand out on my phone really well, more so than in person. So I'm going to go ahead and move stuff out of the way on the floor, lay them out, decide that the order I want. Also, if I take a picture with my phone, when my kids inevitably come in and mess up my layout, I will remember how I want those to go together. Okay, so you might have noticed we've been referring to 12 blocks throughout the video and we only have 9. We opted to only do 9 for this tutorial, so go ahead and definitely feel free to adjust quilt patterns as you need. If you need to make it smaller or bigger, it's totally okay. So the original does call for 12, and so that gives you a nice throw size. The 9x9 is a little bit smaller, but make whatever works for you. So now what we need to do is we need to sew our blocks together. And really, I mean, as far as sewing them together, there isn't anything too terribly fancy, except for now we do have some seams to match up. We're going to be matching up these border seams here and here. So that's something that we really want to pay attention to. So I'm going to make sure that I line those up and that I put a pin. I'm going to put one right behind it, and I'm going to go ahead and put one in front of it just a little bit. And that's going to help make sure that that seam stays where it's supposed to. Come down here and line this one up. Same thing, put one pin on either side of that seam, and that's going to make sure that it doesn't move on me at all. And then I can add another pin here in the middle, just to make sure that things stay where they should there as well. Now I'm ready to take this over to the sewing machine and sew it. I'm actually, before I do that, going to go ahead and pin this one as well, just so that both of them are now ready to go. And I just took the first row for my preferred color layout. And I'm going to sew them together one row at a time. And I'm going to get all the rows sewn together, and then we will sew those rows together very last. All right, oh, one more pin here in the middle. You can see how they're kind of flopping around a little bit. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get those sewn. Now we're going to sew the next side. right, so now we're ready to take this row over and iron it. And with this one, I am going to iron things in a little bit of a specific way. So I'm going to show you how to do that and tell you why. Okay, so now with this, I'm going to iron it in a little bit of a special way, and that's just because I want the seams to go opposite directions on the row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to iron this row and have both of those seams point towards the outside. Then when I iron the next row, I'm going to point them the opposite direction and have them point in towards that middle block. So I'm going to go over to this side, and the same thing, the seam I'm going to iron so it is towards that outside block. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and grab my other blocks and sew rows 2 and 3 together, and 4 together, and then we'll be ready to put them all together as for the finished quilt top. Okay, so I have the second row done. So these seams, like I said, are all going to point in towards the middle block when I iron them. And I'm just going to alternate each row that way, clear down the quilt, so that when I put the rows together, it makes it really easy to line them up. So flip it over here and iron this one in towards the middle block as well. Okay, so now I have the rows done and they're ready to go together. I'm going to show you why we ironed it the way that we did. So I'm going to go ahead and line those corners up, but you can see that they go opposite directions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to push those up and let them rest right against each other. And that's going to make them come together right in the center. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the other seams that I want lined up. I'm going to put one pin on either side. And then I'm going to come over to the next one. I'm going to do the same thing. Put them close to each other and then just kind of push them in and work them in until they're snug right next to each other. And that just helps you nest those in there nice and easy. After that, for pinning the rest of the row, I'm going to go ahead and go out and do the outside edges. And now that everything is in place, I'm going to go ahead and put one just in the middle of each one of the blocks. And that should be enough to hold everything in place where it needs to go while we sew that row together. If you want to, at this point, you can pin the other rows on too and then just go over and just sew them all. Or if you feel more comfortable sewing and pinning each one individually, that works as well. So that one is pinned and ready to go, and then we just need to sew those 2 borders up, and the top is sew those 2 seams up, and then the top will be ready to add our borders, and it is finished. Okay, so now the quilt top, all the blocks are put together and we're ready for our border. And this one does have a little border around the outside, and that's just going to kind of help hold everything together, hold all those seams together. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put that border together. Okay, so now we have our border strips, and there were 7 of them that we cut to go ahead and fit, and you're going to sew these together to make the borders. So the first thing you're going to want to do is we are going to go ahead and you'll see me trim off all of the selvages, and then we're going to just take them and sew them together as needed. Each of these is going to be about roughly 90 inches depending on the width of your fabric, anywhere from 80 to 90 inches depending on the width of your fabric. So they're going to be enough you're going to need for the sides and across the top. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to cut off all the selvages and then just sew a 1/4 inch seam just like we did before to sew all of the 7 strips together, and then we can cut it down into the sizes that we need. On this, however, I am going to go ahead and do a back stitch, and that's because it is not going to be on the edge of the quilt, and a back stitch is going to make sure that those seams stay put and don't come apart between the time that you finish sewing the top and you get to the quilting. Now that the blocks are all sewn together, we are ready to go ahead and add the borders. And it's going to be very tempting to take the strip that you've sewn together, this nice big long strip, and just pin it on and cut it afterwards. But I'm going to tell you, don't do it that way. It's really going to be a lot better as you start learning to sew on borders to measure the size of your quilt. And I mean actually measure your quilt. Don't necessarily even go off the measurements in the pattern. Those should be fairly close, but allowing for some of the differences in sewing and seams and stuff, the most accurate thing to do for your borders is to measure the length of your quilt. And you're just going to start, we're going to put the side borders on first. So you're just going to start at one side and then just measure all the way down. Just keeping it as nice and even as you can so that you get the best measurement. And I'm actually probably going to go ahead and do this a couple of times just to make sure that I get the same measurement both times. So after I've measured that, this is showing about 59 inches, then I'm going to go ahead and take my strip and then I'm going to measure out my 59 inches on that as well. And what this is going to do by taking it and measuring it is it's not going to put any extra fabric in your borders. When you, put a little mark, when you pin them on and just sew and then cut afterwards, you can a lot of times stretch the fabric and get extra fabric in there, and it's going to give you wavy borders, and it's going to be kind of hard to deal with when you're quilting later. So this is going to help prevent that. So now that I have this on, I'm going to go ahead and cut on the 59 inches, and then we will pin it on and sew it to the quilt. Let me grab my... And to pin this on, I'm just going to go ahead and start, and I'm going to pin this side on first. Then I'm going to come over to the other side of the quilt, and I'm going to line it up over here, and I'm going to pin this corner on. After that, I'm going to pin working my way into the center, and that's going to keep me from shifting, and things are going to stay even. As you work in, you're not going to end up with a whole bunch of extra down there or extra in there. So do a couple pins on this side, come do a couple pins on this side, and work your way into the center. Go ahead and add both of your borders onto the sides, and then after you've added the borders on the sides, do the same thing. Measure across the top and bottom, cut your border to match, and then pin on and sew your borders on the top and bottom of your quilt top. And your quilt top is done. So after you finish it up, go ahead and set it aside, and next week we'll come back and we will talk all about quilting, and I'm going to share a very easy free motion quilting motif with you that anyone can do. Also, we'll talk about batting and putting your back together. After that, we will go ahead and teach you how to bind your quilt so that you can actually use it, which is really the point of making quilts anyway. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our future videos. Also, you can visit us on Instagram or Facebook, where we shall share stuff regularly, all the different things that we're working on. And don't forget, you can get the free pattern for Floppy in our subscriber library. So go ahead and visit our website. I have the link in the description below, and sign up for our newsletter, and you will get instant access to our subscriber library, where you can get this pattern plus other fun projects, and we're going to always be adding to that as well. So you want to make sure not to miss out, and we will see you next week. Bye.